The first time watch out, I'm not just the Mecha king really grabbed me by the collar was not with an explosion, not with a flashy tournament entrance, but with a man in a ceremonial pilot coat standing in front of a tribunal projector, watching his own confession play on loop like a curse. Kyle Vane, crown pilot, reigning Mecha king, the guy whose name literally gets chanted in the stadium, just freezes. His jaw tightens, his eyes don't blink, and you can see him doing the math in real time. Someone deep enough in the Empire's throat can fake his biometric signature, doctor his Neuralink telemetry, and make it look like he sold defense routes to raiders. And the show doesn't let you sit comfortably in the spectacle. It makes you sit in the humiliation. It makes you feel what it's like to be framed by a machine that was built to never lie. Welcome back to Flick Flare. By the way, this is one of those reviews where I'm going to talk like I just came out of a 10-hour binge and my brain is still humming with engine noise. Soft ask before we dive in. If you like long-form drama autopsies where we talk craft and feelings without pretending we're robots, hit subscribe. And yes, full spoilers. I'm opening the hangar doors. We're walking right into the late-game wreckage together. Kyle's fall is staged with this brutal ceremonial precision. The court on Aurelia Prime is all marble whites and holographic blues, like the Empire is literally trying to convince you it's clean. The judges sit behind a translucent screen that makes them look like ghosts. And then you get the first of many motifs the drama leans on: reflection. Kyle sees himself reflected in the tribunal glass while the fake confession plays. And it's like the show is quietly asking, what happens when your identity is something other people can render? Because in this world, your mech isn't just a machine. It's a memory vault. It's your performance history, your reflex signature, your pride in steel. And the thing that hits hardest is that the Empire doesn't even have to kill him. They just strip the title, erase his access codes, and exile him to a planet the maps politely label as industrial salvage. That planet, Sablehusk, is introduced like a mouth-swallowing light. The shuttle descends through ash clouds, and the camera lingers on these enormous ribcage silhouettes of dead mechs half-buried in slag, like ancient beasts that crawled here to die. The sound design goes dry. No heroic score, just wind, distant metal clanks, and the occasional groan of something shifting under its own weight. And Kyle, who used to walk through stadium tunnels with fireworks, is now stepping onto soil that looks like charcoal paste, carrying a single duffel bag like he's been reduced to a civilian. And I actually love, that the drama doesn't romanticize exile as some macho back-to-basics montage. Kyle doesn't instantly become wise and humble. He becomes angry in a way that's ugly. He becomes quiet in a way that's scary. He tries to buy paths and gets laughed at. He tries to use his name and it gets him nothing except a shove. There's a scene in episode 2 where he walks into a scrap market, sees a kid wearing a bootleg Mecha King patch, and for a split second he almost smiles, until he realizes it's not his face on the patch anymore. It's the face of his replacement. Because the Empire wastes no time crowning a new champion. Enter Cassian Rook. Smooth hair, smoother PR, a pilot who fights like he's always aware of the camera. Cassian is introduced mid-match, bathed in stadium gold, and the editing is intentionally different from Kyle's old fights. When Kyle used to fight, the show filmed him like a craftsman. Tight shots on control hands, long takes tracking footwork, the weight of metal. Cassian is filmed like a brand. Quick cuts, lens flares, reaction shots of screaming fans. It's not subtle. It's the Empire saying, we don't need the real king. We need the performance of a king. Here's where the series does its first really smart character move. Kyle's father, Chancellor Darius Vane, is not written as a mustache villain. He's written as a man who has spent his whole life believing stability is the highest virtue, and anything that threatens it must be excised, even if that anything is his own son. In their final pre-exile scene, Darius doesn't yell. He doesn't foam at the mouth. He looks exhausted. He says, I can't protect you from evidence. And Kyle, voice cracking but refusing to beg, says, You didn't even try to look for the hand holding it. That line is a thesis statement disguised as a fight with your dad. And just when you think the show is going to stay in that political register, courtroom betrayal, imperial optics, it yanks you into survival mode on Sable Husk. Kyle gets jumped by salvage runners the first night. Not cinematic bandits. Actual desperate people with stun sticks and patched respirators. And he doesn't win because he's the Mecha King. He loses because he's tired and hungry, and he's never been without a security perimeter in his life. He wakes up in a shipping container clinic with a stitched forehead and a woman in grease-stained coveralls telling him very calmly that if he wants to breathe tomorrow, he's going to stop walking around like he owns oxygen. That woman is Rhea Kade, and she's the show's secret weapon for grounding Kyle's arc. Rhea runs a salvage crew called the Kade Pack, half mechanics, half scavengers, all of them carrying that particular sable husk posture of people who have learned to laugh at disaster because crying is expensive. Rhea is not impressed by titles. She's impressed by hands, by whether you show up, by whether you can fix your own mess. She clocks Kyle's accent, clocks his posture, clocks the way he flinches when a nearby mech carcass shifts, and she doesn't ask, "Are you the Mecha King?" She asks, "Do you know how to weld?" And Kyle lies. Of course he lies. He says yes. Now, I need you to hold on to that lie, because that's where the show starts doing something quietly devastating. It makes Kyle rebuild himself from a skill set he never respected. He's been piloting Apex machines with full support crews. He's never had to crawl inside a torso cavity with a headlamp and smell old coolant mixed with burnt wiring. And the first time he tries to weld, he burns through a panel and ruins it. Rhea doesn't comfort him. She hands him another scrap sheet and says, again, it's not cruelty. It's the planet's language. If you're waiting for the junked mech that fights like a beast, the show teases it like a horror movie. In episode 3, Kyle and the Kade Pack are out in the grave trench, this canyon full of mech remains stacked like bones, and they hear something that shouldn't exist, a low-frequency thrum, like a sleeping engine. The camera goes handheld. The color grade shifts colder. Dust hangs in the air like smoke. And then Kyle sees it, half buried under a collapsed transport frame, a mech chassis with no insignia, no sleek armor, just this brutal, angular frame with claw-like manipulator hands. Its cockpit is sealed with old blood-dark resin. It looks less like a knight and more like an animal that learned to stand upright. Rhea calls it the Hound. Everyone on Sable Husk has a story about the Hound. Most of them end with missing limbs. And the show does that delicious thing where it lets you feel Kyle's temptation before he admits it. His fingers hover near the cockpit seal like he's touching a forbidden relic. He says, almost to himself, this isn't Imperial make. Rhea says, no. That's why it's still here. Nobody wants to wake it. So obviously, Kyle wakes it. The first Neuralink attempt is short like a drowning. Kyle jacks in with a jury rig connector. The sound drops out, and all you hear is his breathing and the faint click of Rhea's timer. The cockpit interior is cramped, stitched together from mismatched panels. When the link initializes, the HUD doesn't display Imperial glyphs. It displays raw sensor data like a predator's vision, heat silhouettes, pulse pings, thread gradients. Kyle's eyes widen, and you can see the moment he realizes this mech doesn't want finesse. It wants hunger. Then the Hound moves. Not gracefully, not cleanly. It jerks like something with a spine. The hydraulic squeal. The claws scrape metal. And outside, the salvage crew goes from mocking curiosity to pure panic because the Hound doesn't just stand up. It snaps its head toward them like it can smell fear through steel. That entire sequence is where I started trusting the drama's action language. Because the Hound isn't shot like Cool Robot. It's shot like contained violence. The camera stays low, making it tower. The editing doesn't overcut. It lingers on weight, on the way the ground vibrates, on the way Kyle's hands, inside the cockpit, aren't doing elegant pilot choreography anymore. They're gripping handles like he's wrestling an animal. And here's the rehook question the show basically throws at you without saying it. If Kai was framed through his imperial tech, what does it mean that his second chance is a machine that refuses to speak the Empire's language? The Hound becomes the series' best metaphor and its biggest problem. Because it's not just a new mech, it's a new philosophy. Imperial mechs are about control and spectacle. The Hound is about adaptation and brutality. Kyle starts learning to fight with instinct again, not choreography. And the more he sinks with it, the more the show flirts with this idea that the king title was never about morality, it was about what kind of violence the system rewards. But the drama doesn't let Kyle become an anti-hero power fantasy without consequences. Episode 4 punches him in the face emotionally. The Hound's neural core has an imprint, ghost data, like a half-erased personality. And when Kyle links too deep, he sees flashes. Not his memories. Someone else's. A pilot screaming inside firelight. A child's hand on cockpit glass. A crest being torn of armor. He rips the link out, vomiting onto the cockpit floor, and Rhea just watches, jaw tight, because she recognizes that look. The look of someone realizing they didn't just steal a machine. They stole a grave. This is where the show's writing gets sneaky good. Rhea's not just the mechanic love interest. She's the moral friction. She pushes Kyle to ask, are you rebuilding for justice? Or are you just chasing the feeling of being untouchable again? And Kyle, who is so used to being adored, cannot handle being questioned by someone who doesn't need him. He snaps at her. He says, you think I asked for any of this? And she shoots back, no, you asked for a crown. Crowns come with blades. There's a moment right after that argument where Kyle storms out into the scrapyard night, and the sky is this sickly green aurora from the planet's chemical storms. He stands on a ridge of twisted metal, looking down at the Kade Pack's little camp lights, and he looks lonely. Not tragic hero lonely, just human lonely. And I'll be honest, I felt my throat tighten there. I'm a sucker for stories where the powerful guy learns what it feels like to be unsupported. And this scene didn't play it for pity. It played it for clarity. Then, because this is still a drama with a contest looming, the story starts weaving the tournament back in. The Mecha King contest isn't just sport. It's the Empire's bread and circus and recruitment pipeline. Winners get contracts, territories get funding, losers get forgotten. The upcoming season, called the Ascendant Circuit, is being marketed as a return to honor after Kyle's betrayal. Cassian Rook is the face. Darius Vane appears in broadcasts like a stone statue, saying all the right things about unity, while his eyes look like he hasn't slept since he signed the exile order. And on Sable Husk, Kyle sees those broadcasts in a scrap bar where the screens flicker and the audio cuts out every few seconds. The bar is packed with scavengers who boo the Empire out of habit. But when Cassian's face comes on, a few people actually cheer. Not because they love Cassian, but because they love any story that isn't their own misery. Kyle watches, jaw clenched, and when Cassian dedicates his clean victory to the stability of our borders, Kyle's glass cracks in his hand. Now, I know what you're thinking. Okay, revenge arc. Train with the beast mech, come back, crush the traitors. And yes, the show delivers that satisfaction in big, metallic bites. But what surprised me is how much time it spends on the cost of coming back. Kyle can't just sign up again. His pilot license is revoked. His neural signature is flagged. Imperial tech literally won't let him register without tripping alarms. And that's where the Kade Pack stops being side characters and starts being plot engine. Rhea introduces him to Juno War, a black market coder who lives inside a crashed comms satellite like a gremlin librarian. Juno has this twitchy, delighted energy, like someone who's been bored for years and finally has a project worthy of their obsession. They build Kyle a ghost identity, Kellen was, and they do it in a montage that's shot like a heist but paced like a character study. Kyle sits still while Juno runs a needle-thin scanner over his skull implant, rewriting access layers. The sound is this high, mosquito whine. Rhea watches from the corner, arms crossed, because she hates Imperial tech even when it's being used against the Empire. And then the show drops one of its early bombshells. The Hound score is not just unregistered. It's from a banned line, pre-Union War tech, built before the Empire standardized safety locks. That means it can do things other mechs can't. It can override, it can tear through armor like paper, and it can keep fighting past damage thresholds that would force an Imperial mech to shut down. Which is awesome for the revenge fantasy, until you realize what the drama is setting up. Kyle's comeback is going to be treated as a monster story by the people in power. They will call him unstable, dangerous, illegal. And if he's trying to prove he was framed, showing up with a Warbeast mech is the worst PR imaginable. So why does he still do it? Because Kyle isn't just trying to clear his name. He's trying to punish the people who stole his life. And the show is honest about that. There's a scene where he admits it to Rhea, voice low, staring at the Hound's claw as if it might answer him. He says, "I don't just want to win. I want them to feel it." And Rhea, instead of scolding him, says something that made me sit up. Good. Just don't let that be the only thing you feel. That line becomes a thread, because as Kyle trains, the Hound trains him back. Their fight choreography changes. Kyle starts leaning into feral tactics, grapples, feints, ground and pound style mech combat that looks almost indecent compared to Cassian's elegant arena duels. The cinematography reflects it. More close-range impacts, more cockpit shake, more breathing in the mix. You hear Kyle's exhale on hits. You hear metal scream. The show makes mech fights feel like boxing matches fought with buildings. And in the middle of all this, the political plot creeps closer like a knife behind a curtain. We meet Admiral Soren Price, head of border defense, the man who found the evidence against Kyle. Price is played with the silky menace, always calm, always polite, always 2 steps ahead. He visits Darius in episode 5, bringing him a gift, a restored miniature model of Kyle's old mech, the Regalia Aster. He sets it on Darius' desk like a trophy. He says, "A pity, but necessary." Darius' hand hovers near the model, and he doesn't touch it. He just says, "Do not speak of my son like a broken tool." That tiny moment is the first crack in Darius' loyalty to the narrative. He still believes Kyle might be guilty, but he doesn't like how eagerly Price enjoys the fall. And the show is smart to plant that discomfort early, because the father-son reconciliation isn't a switch flip. It's a slow infection of doubt. Let me pause here for a contrarian take that I didn't expect myself to have. Cassian Rook is not the main villain, and the show is better for it. It would have been so easy to write Cassian as a smug usurper who knowingly benefits from Kyle's exile and twirls his cape. But Cassian is written like a man who has always been second place and is now being handed first place with strings attached. He's ambitious. Yes. He enjoys the spotlight. Yes. But there are quiet scenes where he looks genuinely uncomfortable with how hard the Empire pushes the traitor Kyle narrative. He doesn't correct it because he's not brave enough, but he's not the architect of it. There's this episode 6 scene backstage at the arena where Cassian overhears Price telling a PR handler, "Make the people hate him. It will make them love you." Cassian pauses, his smile falters for half a second, and then he walks out and puts the smile back on like armor. That's not heroism. That's complicity. But it's interesting complicity. It's the kind that makes later confrontations hit harder. And then, just when the show has you comfy in the training and politics rhythm, it hits you with the episode 7 Scrapyard Raid. Raiders, real ones this time, not desperate scavengers, hit the Kade Pack camp at night. The scene is lit by burning fuel drums and emergency flares, everything strobing red and orange. The sound is chaos. Alarms, shouting, the metallic thud of boots on scrap. Kyle runs out half-dressed, grabs a wrench like it's a weapon. And you see how far he's come because his first instinct is not, "Where's my mech?" It's, "Where's Rhea?" He finds her pinned under a collapsed beam while a raider tries to rip her tool belt off. Kyle tackles the guy, and it's messy, not cool. He gets punched. He bleeds. He wins anyway. And then the hound, still half-breed in its hangar pit, wakes up to the violence like a dog smelling blood. Its eyes ignite this harsh, white-blue glare, and it tears through the makeshift hangar wall like paper. What follows is one of the most cinematic mini-sequences in the first half of the drama. And it's the moment I realized the director understands scale. The hound moves through the camp like a nightmare, but the camera stays with the humans. You see tiny figures running between towering legs. You see sparks raining like meteor showers. You hear the hound's claws scraping metal with that teeth-on-bone sound. Kyle climbs into the cockpit mid-chaos, slams the hatch, and the internal audio becomes intimate. His breathing, the Neuralink hum, the heartbeat-like throb of the core. He doesn't pilot it like a hero. He pilots it like a man trying not to become a weapon. And that's the tension. Because the hound doesn't just defend the camp. It over-defends. It grabs a raider mech by the arm and rips it off with a sickening ease that makes the whole crowd go silent. Kyle stares at the severed limb in his HUD like he's seeing himself from the outside. For a second, you can feel him enjoy it. Then he hates himself for enjoying it. The drama lets both feelings exist at once, and that's rare. After the raid, the Kade pack is shaken. One of the younger scavengers, Tamsin, looks at Kyle like he's brought a curse. Rhea confronts him, voice tight. If you bring that thing into the circuit, you bring the Empire's attention here. Kyle says they already know this planet exists. Rhea snaps, not like this. And then she says the line that quietly reframes the whole story. You think you're the only one who lost everything? Because yes, Kyle's pain is huge, but Sable Husk is full of people whose lives were eaten by Imperial policy long before Kyle got framed. The show doesn't let him be the center of suffering. It makes him share the frame. And that matters, because it changes his revenge from personal to systemic whether he wants it to or not. So Kyle makes a promise. Not a heroic speech, not a grand oath. Just a low, earnest sentence. If I go back, I'll make it count. And for the first time, you see Rhea believe he might mean it. Now, the path back to the contest is where the writing gets deliciously procedural in the best way. They need a ship. They need parts. They need a legal entry point. And they need to get the hound off planet without triggering Imperial scanners. Juno rigs a signal cloak. Rhea calls in a favor from an old smuggler captain named Brigholt, a man who looks like he was carved out of old rope and regret. Brig's ship, the Larkspur, is held together by faith and stolen bolts. The boarding scene is pure texture. Damp metal ramps, the smell of oil, flickering cabin lights, a tiny shrine of spare circuit boards taped to the wall like a sailor's superstition. And Kyle, this is a tiny character beat I adored, tries to pay Brig with an Imperial credit chip. Brig laughs so hard he coughs. He says, "Boy, that thing's a tracking beacon with a logo." Kyle flushes, embarrassed, and you can see how exile has forced him into a humiliating kind of learning curve. It's funny in a dry way, but it also hurts because it underscores how sheltered his power used to be. I had a little moment of, "Oh Kyle, you thought money was just money." Also, yes, I laughed. I'm only human. Don't judge me. The escape from Sable Husk is staged like a birth. The hound is loaded into the cargo bay, chained down like an animal, and the ship lifts off through the ash cloud while Imperial patrol lights flicker in the distance. The score swells, not triumphant, more like anxious strings trying to hold a note. Kyle watches Sable Husk shrink in the viewport, and he doesn't look relieved. He looks like he's leaving a debt unpaid. And then the drama gives us its first big public comeback moment. Kyle, under his ghost identity, enters the Ascendant Circuit qualifiers on the industrial moon of Halcyon Drift. The qualifiers are shot completely differently from the Imperial Stadium. It's grimy, fluorescent, crowded. Pilots are elbowing each other in hallways. Mechs are patched with tape. It feels like the undercard of a world that pretends it's all gold and honor. Kyle walks in wearing a plain jacket, hood up, face partially shadowed. And you can feel the show saving the irony. The former king sneaking into his own kingdom's basement. And you know what? The acting here is so key. The actor playing Kyle doesn't do some dramatic, I'm back grin. He does restraint. He does that little swallow you do when you're trying not to show emotion in public. He keeps his eyes down. But when he passes a poster of Cassian with the words, the true king, his hand twitches like he wants to tear it down. He doesn't. He keeps walking. That choice is maturity. Not moral purity. Just control. The first qualifier match with the Hound is where the drama starts, flexing its action storytelling as character storytelling. Kyle goes up against a pilot named Mako Zen in a mid-tier mech called the Sunlands, all bright armor and clean thrust jets. Mako fights like a fencer. Kyle fights like someone who learned to fight in a scrapyard. The Hound doesn't dodge elegantly. It absorbs. It takes a hit on the shoulder, lets the armor crack, then uses the momentum to close distance and slam Mako into a wall. And the crowd doesn't cheer at first. There's this uneasy pause, like they're not sure if what they're watching is allowed. Then someone yells, again, and it snowballs into this rough, hungry roar. The camera cuts to Cassian watching the feed from a VIP lounge, and his smile goes tight. Price, beside him, doesn't even blink. He just says, find out who that is. Here's the thing that kept me glued around episode 8 and 9. The show doesn't treat Kyle's anonymity as a cute disguise gimmick. It treats it like psychological torture. Kyle has to stand in the same arenas where his name used to be screamed, and now he's Kellen Voss, a nobody. He watches commentators talk about the missing Mecha king like he's dead. He hears people call him traitor casually, like it's trivia. And he can't correct them without blowing everything up. There's a scene in the Halcyon Drift locker room where a rookie pilot asks Kyle, "You ever meet Kyle Vane?" And Kyle, without thinking, says, "Yes." The kid asks, "Why died? Was he as arrogant as they say?" Kyle pauses. His face does this tiny flicker, pain, anger, something like regret. And then he says, "He was worse." The kid laughs, thinking it's a joke. Kyle doesn't. That's the show quietly making Kyle face himself. Not just his enemies. Himself. The qualifier arc also introduces one of my favorite side characters. Serafine Serra Olt, a veteran pilot with a busted knee and a mouth like a chainsaw. She recognizes Kyle's movement patterns immediately. She watches him fight and mutters, "That footwork is royal." She corners him afterward, presses him against a Meg Bay wall, and says, "Either you're Kyle Vane or you trained with his ghost." Kyle tries to brush past, and she grabs his sleeve and says, "If you're him, don't be stupid. They're hunting you." Kyle finally looks at her, and the way he says, "I know," is so flat it's chilling. Sarah becomes a kind of reluctant mentor ally, not because she's noble, but because she hates Price. The show reveals she used to pilot for border defense and watched Price sacrifice a squad to protect a supply line that secretly carried black budget tech. She calls him a man who sells patriotism by the pound. And that gives Kyle his first real lead. Price didn't just frame him to remove a rival. Price framed him to remove an obstacle to something bigger. And right there is the mid-season pivot. This isn't only about revenge. It's about a conspiracy inside the Empire's defense apparatus, tied to banned mech cores and staged border raids used to justify military expansion. If you're like me, this is where you lean closer to the screen, because suddenly every earlier scene gets a second meaning. The raiders on Sable Husk? Too organized. Too well-armed. The speed of Kyle's replacement? Too convenient. The tribunal's confidence? Too rehearsed. The show is telling you the Empire didn't just punish Kyle. It used Kyle as a narrative weapon. The irony is, Kyle coming back with the Hound is also a narrative weapon. And the show plays this duality like a drumbeat. By the time Kyle qualifies for the televised bracket, he's exhausted. There's a bruised, hollow look to him, like every win costs him sleep. And Rhea, who has now come off Sable Husk with Briggs' crew to serve as his mechanic, is watching him change. They're a quiet scene on the Larkspur, where she finds him sitting in the cargo bay, staring at the Hound's chained claws. He's not even in the cockpit. He's just sitting there, like someone sitting outside an ICU room. Rhea asks, "Are you scared of it?" Kyle says, "I'm scared of what it makes easy." That line hit me in a very specific way, because it's the kind of fear you don't get to have when you're powerful. Power is always marketed as freedom. But real power is access. And access makes certain choices feel smooth. Too smooth. Kyle is afraid of how smoothly the Hound lets him hurt people. And then, episode 10, the drama finally lets Kyle and Cassian share air for the first time since the exile. Not face-to-face yet, because the show knows how to pace its collisions, but in parallel. Cassian is doing a charity appearance at an orphan mech academy, smiling for cameras, while Kyle is in a back corridor of the same facility because the tournament uses the academy's training arena for a media shoot. Kyle hears Cassian's laugh echo down the hall. He stops. The camera pushes in on Kyle's face, and you can see rage try to climb out of him like a hand. He takes one step forward, and then he hears children cheering. He hesitates. That hesitation is the whole show in a nutshell. Kyle wants revenge so badly he can taste it, but he's not a cartoon. He's a person. He remembers what it felt like to be a kid watching the Mecha King on screens, dreaming of being chosen. Cassian is standing in that childhood space, wearing Kyle's old myth like a borrowed jacket. Kyle doesn't storm in. He turns away, jaw clenched so hard you can see his cheek muscle jump. And you think, okay, restraint, growth, maybe. But then the drama cuts to Admiral Price watching the same event from a security feed, and he smiles like someone who just watched bait twitch. He tells an aide, the ghost is close. Keep the father unaware. He says the father, like Darius, is a piece on a board, not a man. And that's when the show makes it clear PRYCE's real threat isn't that he framed Kyle. It's that he enjoys controlling the story more than he enjoys winning. Now let's talk production design for a second. Because Watch Out is one of those dramas where the world feels built, not just sketched. Aurelia Prime is all clean lines and bright air, like a propaganda poster you can live inside. Sable Husk is rust and soot and cluttered survival tech. Halcyon Drift is corporate grime, industrial chic where everything is functional and none of it is loved. And the circuit arenas? They're temples. Every arena has its own visual identity. The Halcyon Ring is a circular pit with vertical light bars like prison beams. Later arenas shift into open-air platforms where you see the planet's horizon, and the show uses that openness to make the fights feel like they're happening under judgment. The costuming does a lot of character work too. Kyle's exile wardrobe is intentionally unflattering at first, too big, too plain, like he's wearing someone else's life. As he returns, his clothes become more fitted, more deliberate, but never fully regal again. Even when he gets a new pilot coat mid-season, it's patched, mate, and practical. Rhea's look stays consistent: heavy boots, tool belts, hair tied back, a tiny necklace made from a mech bolt she refuses to explain until much later. Cassian's wardrobe is all polished fabrics, bright trims, sponsor emblems, like he's always dressed for a camera flash. Price wears dark novel suits that absorb light, like the show doesn't want you to ever see him clearly. Music-wise, the drama has three major motifs. Kyle's Imperial theme, all brass and clean percussion. Sable Husk's theme, this low, gritty synth hum with occasional lonely strings, and the Hound's motif, which is barely music, more like a pulse, a distorted bass heartbeat that creeps in underscenes even when the mech isn't present. By episode 9, you start hearing the Hound's pulse under Kyle's conversations with Rhea, which is such a smart way to show how it's getting into his life. And yes, before someone comments it, there are moments where the show is a little too in love with slow-motion sparks. It's 2026, The budget clearly went to metal and lighting. And sometimes the director is like, what if we made this welding scene look like a perfume commercial? It doesn't ruin anything, but it did make me snort once. Like, okay, yes, gorgeous molten spray, I get it. We are artsy now. But then the writing slams you back into emotional stakes with the episode 11 reveal. The Hound's previous pilot wasn't some anonymous war criminal. It was Cale Vane, Kyle's older brother, officially listed as dead in a border accident years ago. The show drops this like a meteor. Kyle discovers it not through dialogue, but through the Neuralink imprint finally resolving into a clear memory. He's linked in too deep, chasing a movement optimization, when suddenly the cockpit fills with a child's voice saying, Cale, don't go. The voice is unmistakably young Kyle. Then you see Cale's hands, scarred, older, closing the cockpit hatch. You see the crest being torn off the mech and tossed into fire. You hear Cale whisper, if they find you, they'll make you a symbol. I'd rather be a monster. Kyle rips out of the link screaming. He stumbles out of the cockpit, collapses onto the hangar floor, and for a second the camera just stays with him, shaking slightly like the world is unsteady. Rhea runs to him, and he grabs her sleeve so hard his knuckles go white. He says, my brother isn't there. Rhea's face goes pale. She whispers, that's not possible. Kyle laughs, one of those broken laughs that isn't humor at all, and says, in this empire, anything is possible if it serves the story. That twist does so much at once. It makes the Hound personal. It makes Kyle's exile part of a longer family tragedy. It also reframes Darius. Because if Cale died in a border accident and the Hound is banned war tech, then Darius either knows more than he admitted, or he's been lied to for years by the same people now framing Kyle. And you can feel Kyle's revenge shift. It's no longer just, make the traitors pay. It becomes, find out what they did to my family. This is where I'll drop a personal confession, because I didn't expect a mech drama to get under my skin like this. I've watched a lot of betrayed hero comes back stronger stories, and I usually enjoy them in a popcorn way. But the brother reveal hit something tender for me, because it turns Kyle's obsession into grief. Not just anger. Grief for time stolen, for a brother turned into a weapon, for a father who may have chosen empire over sons more than once. I had to pause after episode 11 and just sit there, which is not something I do often unless a show really lands a blow. And the drama doesn't let Kyle process it neatly. He becomes reckless. He starts pushing the Hound harder, trying to force more memories out of it, like he can excavate Cale from the metal. Rhea argues with him. Juno warns him the core is unstable. Sarah tells him, bluntly, you're not the only one who lost someone to price. Kyle doesn't listen, because grief makes you selfish. The show understands that. Meanwhile, on Aurelia Prime, Darius is watching Kyle's ghost identity rise in the brackets, and there's a moment where he sees the Hound's movement pattern on a broadcast and his face changes. His eyes narrow. His hand grips his chair arm. He whispers, so quietly you almost miss it, that stance. And the camera cuts to the miniature model of Regalia Aster still on his desk, untouched. So now you've got three converging vectors. Kyle chasing truth through the Hound, Price tightening the net, and Darius starting to suspect the Empire's narrative is rotting from the inside. And here's the question that kept me binging past midnight. When Kyle finally steps into the main arena again, is he coming back as a king reclaiming his throne? Or as a brother dragging a family curse into the spotlight? Because episode 12 ends with Kyle receiving an encrypted message on his ghost comm. No sender ID. Just coordinates and a single sentence. If you want Cale's full file, stop pretending you're Kellen was. Kyle stares at the message, the Hound's pulse humming under the audio mix like a warning, and Rhea, standing behind him, says, don't go alone. Kyle doesn't answer right away. He just looks at the dark cockpit glass, sees his own reflection, and for a split second, it's like he's staring at two faces at once. Then he says, very softly, I don't think I'm alone anymore, and he reaches for the hanger controls to open the bay doors as the storm outside starts to roll in. And the scene cuts on that rising wind like the world itself is holding its breath before the next hit lands. The bay doors grind open, and the storm air hits them like a slap, wet, metallic, full of that electric tang you only get right before lightning. Briggs' Larkspur is already idling on the pad, its thrusters cuffing, and Rhea has to lean into the wind to even shout, "Kyle, you don't know who sent that." Kyle doesn't look back the way a normal person looks back. He looks back like someone memorizing a face before war. "That's why I'm going," he says, and the show lets the sentence hang there, swallowed by the storm, because the real subtext is, "I'm tired of being acted upon. I'm going to choose the danger this time." The coordinates lead them into halcyon drifts under structure, below the bright televised arenas, into the places where the cameras don't linger. The corridors get narrower, the lighting turns that sickly institutional green, and you can feel the production design flexing its metaphor muscles. Upstairs, sport and glory. Downstairs, pipes and secrets. Kyle walks with his hood up, but the show keeps framing him in reflection again. Puddles on the floor, warped steel panels, security screens that lag half a second. It's like every surface is trying to remind him he's still a ghost. And right here, the drama does a little misdirect that I genuinely enjoyed. You expect an ambush. You expect PRYCEs, men to pour out of the shadows with stun rifles. Instead, the door at the end of the corridor opens quietly, and a woman steps out holding a tablet like it's a peace offering. She's dressed like facility staff, plain grey uniform, hair pinned back, badge that reads Meena Soren, Archive Compliance. Her eyes are steady in that unnerving way of people who have already decided to betray the system and just need you to catch up. She looks at Kyle and doesn't say his fake name. She says, Kyle Vane, like she's naming a fact the Empire failed to erase. Rhea's hand slides to the pistol tucked in her belt. Kyle holds a palm out, not because he trusts Meena, but because he knows a trigger-happy moment is exactly how men like Price win. Meena steps aside and lets them into a tiny archive room lined with cold storage drives, the kind of place that smells like dust and ozone and the faint sweetness of antiseptic. There's one flickering screen on the wall showing a paused file header, Project Cerberus. Pilot integration, classified. Meena doesn't do dramatic speeches. She doesn't even sit. She just turns the tablet toward Kyle and says, "You wanted Kale's full file. This is what exists. Everything else was burned." Kyle's eyes flick over the first page, and you see his breathing change, like someone realizing the room has less air than they thought. The file has Kale's name, his service record, his photo, older, sharper face, eyes that look like they've already watched the world lie to him. Cause of death, redacted. Disposition, neural transfer confirmed. Kyle swallows. Neural transfer, he repeats, and the way he says it is half disgust, half disbelief. Meena says they built an interface that could copy a pilot imprint into a core. Not consciousness in the holy sense, but enough reflex architecture to make a mech fight like a person. She looks at the Hound's cockpit feed image on the tablet, and her mouth tightens. They called it legacy control. They told the Senate it was for emergency continuity. It was for weaponizing the dead. That is the moment the show stops being just a comeback story and becomes, fully, a horror story about institutions that refuse to let bodies rest. And then Kyle scrolls. And there it is, authorization signature. Chancellor Darius V. Vaiani. The camera doesn't cut away. It stays on Kyle's face as he reads his father's name like it's a knife. His eyes go glossy, not with tears yet, but with pressure. His jaw works. He tries to speak and nothing comes out. Rhea leans in behind him, reads it, and you can see her anger ignite, not at Kyle, not even at Darius specifically, but at the whole blood-soaked architecture of necessary decisions. Meena, to her credit, doesn't gloat. She just says, he didn't sign the transfer. He signed the program. Price ran it. Kale was the first successful imprint. And you feel the show daring you to simplify it. You feel it daring you to go, oh, so the father is the true villain. But it refuses to make it that clean. Because the signature is dated 12 years ago, when Darius wasn't the stern chancellor we know now, but the head of security oversight during a border crisis the Empire still calls the Grey Incursions. There's context. There's fear. There's propaganda. There's the kind of pressure that makes men justify monstrous experiments as prevention. Still, it's his name. Here's the hook that yanks you forward at this point. Kyle has been fighting to make his father admit he was wrong about the frame-up. Now he's staring at proof that his father was wrong about something even bigger, and that wrong may have cost his brother a human death. Kyle's hand trembles as he reaches toward the screen, like touching it could change the letters. Ria's voice goes low, intimate, dangerous. Kyle. He doesn't answer. He stands up so fast the chair clatters. He turns away, walks to steps, then slams his fist into the metal shelf so hard the drives rattle. The sound is sharp and ugly. Meena flinches. Ria doesn't. She lets him have it, because sometimes you need that noise. And then Meena says, very quietly, I didn't bring you here to hurt you. I brought you here because Price is moving. He's going to use the circuit finals as a cover for a security coup. He wants you in the arena. Kyle whips around. Why would he want me in the arena? Meena's gaze flicks to the ceiling corner where a security camera blinks. Because monsters are easier to control when the public can see them. And yes, right on cue, the camera blinks faster. The ambush comes late, and that's what makes it effective. The archive room lights flick off. The only illumination is the tablet screen and the faint glow of emergency strips. Footsteps thunder down the corridor. You hear boots, armor, that soft whine of powered rifles charging. Ria pulls Kyle behind a shelf. Meena grabs a small drive and shoves it into Kyle's palm. That's a copy, she whispers. If you survive, don't let it disappear. Kyle doesn't say thank you. He just closes his fingers around it like it's a piece of bone. The door blows inward with a concussive pop, and PRYCE's black keel unit pours in, sleek armor, faceplates with no expression, movements too synchronized to feel human. The show shoots them from a low angle, making them look like an incoming tide. Kyle's hand goes to his comm. No signal. Juno's cloak is blocking everything. Ria swears under her breath. And it's the first time you hear her sound scared instead of angry. Then Meena does something that reframes her entire character in one motion. She steps out of cover and raises her hands, shouting, Compliance Officer Meena Soren. This is an archival breach. She says it in that clipped bureaucratic tone, like she's trying to weaponize paperwork against guns. It buys them to seconds. Not because the soldiers respect the law, but because their targeting protocols hesitate at an identified Imperial employee. In those 2 seconds, Kyle and Ria sprint out the back door into the maintenance shafts, steel ladders slick with condensation. Ria moves like she's done this before. Kyle moves like someone learning to run without a throne beneath him. The camera follows them in tight, shaky handheld, and the sound becomes breath and metal and distant shouting, no music at all. Like the show wants you trapped in the body panic. And then, as they climb, you hear Meena scream. It's brief. Cut off. Kyle freezes on the ladder, muscles locking. Ria grabs his boot and hisses. Move. He moves, but his eyes go blank in that way that says he's already filing the scream into his internal archive of reasons. They burst out into an arena service bay where the Hound is waiting, chained and restless. Juno and Brig are there, half ready for departure. Because of course they are, this crew doesn't do trust falls, they do contingency plans. The bay doors begin to close as the black keel unit floods in behind them. Kyle doesn't have time to unlock all the safety restraints. He just climbs into the cockpit, slams the neural jack in, and the Hound wakes like it's been starving. The HUD blooms with those predator gradients. The bass pulse hits the sound mix like a second heart. Kyle yanks the control, and the hound's claws snap the chains with a violence that makes Brig physically recoil. The next 90 seconds are pure cinematic adrenaline. The hound charges into the bay corridor, shoulder checks a blast door, sparks raining like fireflies. Black Keel soldiers fire. Shots ricochet, leaving molten pockmarks. Kyle swings the hound's arm, and the claw catches a soldier's rifle, bends it like tin. Rhea, in a control booth, slams override buttons to keep doors open. Juno is screaming coordinates at Brig. Brig is yelling something about insurance not covering this with the exact tone of a man who knows he's going to die for a paycheck he already spent. And then the hound pauses. In the middle of chaos, it pauses, head tilting like it heard something Kyle didn't. Kyle's eyes widen. Kale, he whispers without meaning to. And the show gives you this quick, airy flash, Kale's hands in the cockpit. Kale's voice murmuring, left. Kyle jerks the controls left instinctively, and a missile streaks through where the hound's head would have been. Kyle's stomach drops. Rhea hears him whisper Kale's name over the comm and goes silent. That's when the drama makes the brother imprint not just a twist, but an active presence. The hound isn't only a beast, it's a haunted beast. And it's helping him. They escape, barely, through the cargo gate, Brig's larkspur lifting off as the bay doors finally slam shut behind them. The last shot of the sequence is the facility shrinking beneath storm clouds, and Kyle sitting in the cockpit, hands shaking, staring at the drive Meena gave him like it's heavier than metal. If you thought the show was going to give him time to process that, no. It throws him straight into the televised bracket stage because the Empire understands something very well. Public spectacle is the best place to bury private grief. The bracket stage shifts the aesthetic again. The production gets glossy. The lighting becomes theatrical. The announcers' voices are louder. There's a whole pomp sequence where Cassian Rook walks down a long ramp, cape fluttering, sponsor drones buzzing around him like insects. The crowd chants his name in waves that feel engineered. And then, when Kyle, still Kellen was on paper, walks out with the hound, the chanting falters into a murmur that feels like fear trying to decide if it's allowed to exist. The commentators don't know what to do with him. One of them calls the hound a relic. Another calls it illegal adjacent. The third says, a reminder that the circuit welcomes all within reason. That last phrase is delivered with a brittle laugh, and you can hear the Empire's PR hand in the room. Kyle's first bracket match is against a fan favorite named Leora Thane, piloting the Seraphic Bloom, this gorgeous white and pink mech with wing-like stabilizers built for aerial acrobatics. It's a design flex from the art team, and it's also a character flex. Leora fights like a dancer. The match starts with her launching into the air, petals of light trailing from her thrusters, crowd roaring because it's beautiful. And Kyle doesn't ruin it. This is one of those surprising character beats I didn't expect, and it's why I can't call the show mindless. Kyle could have simply yanked her out of the air with the hound's claws, brutalize her, make a statement. Instead, he keeps the hound grounded and defensive for the first half, letting her perform, letting the audience see her skill. He takes hits. He absorbs. He waits. Why? Because Kyle used to be Leora. He knows what it means to have your craft dismissed by someone bigger and meaner. And after the Sable Husk raid, after Meena's scream, after seeing his father's signature, something in him recalibrates. He still wants vengeance, but he's no longer willing to become PRYCE's caricature of him. So he waits until Leora overcommits on a downward strike, then steps aside and hooks her ankle joint with a hound's claw, not tearing, just catching, and he gently but firmly slams her mech onto the arena floor in a way that disables her wing stabilizer without ripping it off. The sound is still huge, the impact still shakes cameras, but it's controlled violence. When Leora ejects safely, Kyle's cockpit mic picks up his whispered, "I'm sorry." And it's not performative. It's a real apology for using force at all. This match is also where the director does one of my favorite visual tricks in the series. During the slow-motion replay of the takedown, the Hound's HUD briefly overlays Kale's old targeting reticle, different shape, different color, like the machine is remembering with him. It's subtle, but if you're watching closely, it's chilling. Now, because we're in full spoilers, I'm going to say it plainly. Cassian figures out Kyle's identity before the quarterfinals. Not because Kyle slips up, because Cassian can't stop looking. There's a scene in Cassian's private training chamber, sleek walls, mirrored surfaces, that sterile luxury that feels like a cage, where he replays the footage of the Hound match over and over. He pauses on a frame where the Hound shifts its weight into a specific stance. Cassian leans closer to the screen, eyes narrowed, and you can see memory hit him like a punch. Because Kyle used to teach that stance in public masterclasses. Cassian learned it. Everyone learned it. But the way Kellen Voss uses it is too intimate, too natural. Cassian whispers, Kyle. And here's the twist within the twist. Cassian doesn't report it immediately. He sits with it. He watches PRYCE's broadcasts. He listens to the PR team instruct him to call Kyle a traitor in interviews even though Kyle is supposedly gone. Cassian's smile starts looking like strain. His hands start trembling in close-ups. The actor playing Cassian, credit where it's due, does this really good job of making ambition look like a kind of self-harm. He wanted the crown, but he didn't realize it came with a muzzle. So when Price finally corners Cassian in episode 14 and says, the Beast Pilot. Who is he? Cassian lies. He says, nobody. PRYCE's eyes narrow. Nobody doesn't move like that. Cassian forces a laugh. Maybe your king wasn't as unique as he thought. Price steps closer, and the lighting makes his face look carved. Do not protect him, Price says softly. He will drag you down, and I will not let my circuit be infected. My circuit. That possessive slips out like truth. And that's the hook. Price isn't just protecting the empire. He's building his own throne inside it. Back on the Larkspur, Kyle finally opens Mina's drive with Juno's help. Juno projects the files onto the cargo bay wall, and the documents spill out like a confession the Empire never planned to make. Project Cerberus was a program to create multi-life pilot cores, imprints harvested from elite pilots, stored in cores, then installed into unmanned mechs to create soldiers that fight with human creativity without human dissent. Kale was the prototype imprint, and the Hound line, designated CERB-01, was built to disregard safety thresholds, to keep attacking even when the pilot would normally be forced to disengage. Rhea reads the files in silence, face hardening. Kyle keeps scanning for one thing, Kale's final status. Is he dead? Is he something else? And then they find a video clip embedded in the archive, heavily corrupted, but playable. It's Kale, in a dim room, speaking directly to a camera. He looks bruised. He looks like someone who has already decided the world is not going to save him. He says, if you're watching this, it means they used me. I'm sorry. He pauses, breath hitching, and then he says the line that becomes the emotional anchor for the rest of the season. Kyle, do not become a king again. Become a door. Kyle stares at the projection like he's been shot. Rhea's hand covers her mouth. Even Brig, who pretends not to care about anyone, goes still. Become a door. Not a sword. Not a crown. A door. Something that lets others pass through. It's a gorgeous thematic pivot, because the show has been asking what Kyle's identity is beyond the title, and Kale, through a ghost recording, hands him a new purpose. And it's also cruel, because it implies Kale anticipated Kyle would come looking, which means Kale knew he was being turned into a weapon and still tried to leave his brother a map out of the same trap. Now, if this were a lesser drama, Kyle would immediately go full righteous hero and decide to expose everything with a speech. Watch Out doesn't do that. It keeps Kyle messy. It keeps him angry. It keeps him tempted by the easy path of just ripping PRYC's head off in the arena. There's a quiet scene after the video where Kyle goes into the cockpit alone and just sits there, hands on the control grips without powering up. The only sound is the ship's engine hum and the faint creak of the Hound's frame settling. Kyle whispers, "I don't know how to be a door." And then, in the HUD, a small text flickers, old, non-imperial code, 2 words, open left. It's Kale's imprint. Helping, guiding, not controlling. And Kyle's eyes fill with tears he doesn't wipe away. I'm going to be honest. That scene broke me a little. Not in a melodramatic way, in a very specific way. Because it hit that feeling of wanting advice from someone you lost and getting it too late through some imperfect medium. The show turns sci-fi tech into grief tech. And it works. Meanwhile, on Aurelia Prime, Darius is finally forced to confront the rot in his own house. He calls Price in for a private meeting, no advisors, no cameras, just 2 men in a room that's too clean. Darius places a printed page on the desk, a still frame of the Hound from the bracket match. Price glances at it like it's a bug. Darius says, "I want to know what that machine is." Price smiles faintly. A curiosity. Darius' voice hardens. "I recognize it." PRYCE's smile doesn't change. Then you recognize that some curiosities should stay buried. Darius stands. "You are not authorized to bury anything from me." Price finally lets a sliver of irritation show. "Chancellor," he says, "with respect, your authorization is ceremonial. The Empire runs on fear now. You of all people taught it that." And then Price delivers the most venomous line he gets all season, quite as a whisper. "You signed Cerberus. You can't pretend you're clean just because you regret the smell." Darius' face goes pale. His hand trembles, just once, and you realize he remembers. He remembers what he signed. He remembers the briefing rooms, the border panic, the promises that it would save lives. The show doesn't excuse him. It just shows you how a man becomes complicit. Here's the thing that surprised me, and this is my second contrarian take. Darius is not written as a father who didn't love his sons. He's written as a father who loved them and still chose Empire logic over them when it mattered. That's worse, in a way. It's not absence of love. It's a belief system that can override love. And that's the real antagonist of the show. Not Price alone, but the ideology that makes Price possible. Back in the circuit, Kyle's quarterfinal is against Sarah OLT. And yes, they actually make them fight, and it is deliciously painful. Because Sarah is the one person who has been both warning him and helping him, and the bracket doesn't care about your alliances. The arena for this match is the glass basin, an open-air platform suspended over a reflective salt lake, with transparent panels under sections of the ring so you can see the shimmering void beneath. It's stunning, and it's also metaphor. They're literally fighting on a surface that shows you your reflection. Sarah pilots a mech called the Iron Canticle, heavy, tanky, built like a moving cathedral with hymn-like resonance emitters that can disrupt targeting sensors. Every time it steps, you hear this low chime. It's such a bold design choice, and the sound team makes it feel spiritual in the creepiest way. The Canticle is built for control. The Hound is built for chaos. The fight starts slow, like a chess match. Sarah doesn't rush. She circles. Kyle tries to bait her. She doesn't bite. Over the comm, Sarah says, "Stop trying to intimidate me with the monster." "I used to work for the monster," Kyle replies. "Then you know what it does." Sarah says, "I know what it makes you think you're allowed to do." And then she triggers the Canticle's resonance field. The Hound's HUD fuzzes. The Predator gradients smear. Kyle's view becomes unreliable. The show visualized this with subtle image distortion and audio wobble, like the world is suddenly underwater. It's not just a cool effect, it's character pressure. Kyle has been relying on the Hound's instincts. Now he's blind. So Kyle does something that, for me, marks his real growth. He stops listening to the Hound and starts listening to himself. He slows down. He uses tactile feedback. He counts steps by vibration. He remembers what it was like to pilot before he had imperial assists, before he was a brand. The choreography becomes more human, less beast. There's a moment where the hound's claw grazes the transparent panel and cracks it. Spiderweb fractures spreading underfoot. The camera cuts to the lake far below, reflecting the two mechs like gods fighting in water. Sarah lunges, and Kyle sidesteps at the last second, letting the canticle's hammer arm smash into the weakened panel. It shatters. The canticle's foot slips. The crowd gasps, sound rising like a wave. Kyle could finish it right there. A brutal downward strike. A rip. A kill shot. He doesn't. He hooks Sarah's mech and stabilizes it, preventing it from falling through the shattered panel into the lake. It's a split-second choice, but the show slows it just enough for you to feel the decision. Sarah's eyes widen in her cockpit close-up. Kyle says into the comm, "I'm not Price." Sarah exhales, a laugh of disbelief. "Good," she says. "Then win." She disengages, letting him throw her out of bounds cleanly, taking the loss without resentment. After the match, Sarah limps up to Kyle in the mech bay and presses something into his hand, an old border defense access token. "This will get you into PRYCE's inner hangar on finals night," she says. Kyle stares at it. "Why help me after I beat you?" Sarah shrugs. "Because I didn't lose to you. I lost to the bracket. And I'm tired of letting Price write endings." That line is the show telling you, again, this isn't about one guy's vengeance. It's about who gets to author history. Now, the semi-final is the one everyone wanted. Kyle versus Cassian. The drama milks the anticipation without dragging it, which is a hard balance. And it earns the collision by making it emotionally complicated rather than purely hype. Before the fight, Cassian requests a private meeting with Kellen Voss. The setting is a quiet corridor behind the arena stage, lit by soft blue strips, far from cameras. Cassian arrives without entourage for once, no cape, no sponsor drones. Just a man in a plain training jacket, looking younger than his public image. Kyle keeps his hood up. Rhea stands a few paces back, arms crossed like a guard dog. Cassian says, "Take off the hood." Kyle doesn't move. Cassian steps closer. "I know it's you." Kyle's voice is low. "Then you know you shouldn't be here." Cassian laughs softly, bitter. "You think I have choices?" He reaches out and yanks the hood down. And for a second, the show goes quiet. No music, no crowd, just the sound of two men breathing in the same air after a year of propaganda separating them. Cassian's face does something complicated. Relief, guilt, fear, admiration, all tangled. "You're alive," he whispers, like he's been carrying the lie heavier than he admitted. Kyle's eyes are cold. "You wore my crown," he says. Cassian flinches. "They gave it to me," he snaps, then immediately regrets the defensiveness. He rubs his forehead like it hurts. "Kyle, I didn't. I didn't plant the evidence." Kyle steps closer, voice sharpening. "But you smiled on the stage while they called me traitor." Cassian meets his gaze. "Yes," he says, and he doesn't excuse it. "I did. Because I was a coward. And because part of me thought if I played along, they'd stop digging. I thought it would end with you gone. I didn't know Price was building, whatever this is." Kyle's jaw tightens. Rhea watches, eyes flicking between them, like she's ready to intervene if Kyle becomes reckless. Cassian lowers his voice. "Price is going to use finals night to unveil Cerberus units. He's going to stage an attack on the arena, blame traitor supporters, and take emergency control of the Senate. He's already placed Black Keel squads under the stands." Kyle's eyes narrow. "How do you know?" Cassian swallows. "Because I'm the face. They tell me what story to sell, and I'm done selling it." Kyle studies him for a long beat. And here's the surprising thing. Kyle doesn't punch him. He doesn't forgive him either. He just says, "If you're lying, I'll break you." Cassian nods. "Fair." Then Cassian adds, quietly, "I kept your old regalia Astacor. Price wanted it scrapped. I told them it was a contamination risk. He gives a humorless smile. Turns out I can lie when it benefits me. Kyle's expression flickers. Not warmth. Something like grief. Because that mech was his identity. His craft. His home. Cassian says, if you win the semi-final, I'll give it back to you. If I win, I'll still give it back. Because it was never mine. And then the show cuts to the arena call. Time's up. Feelings later. Violence now. The semi-final fight is one of the best directed action sequences of the year, and I don't say that lightly. The arena is the ascendant ring, massive, circular, with rotating platforms that shift elevation mid-match. The lighting is gold and white, blinding, like the Empire is insisting on purity, even while plotting murder under the seats. Cassian pilots his signature mech, the Crown Flare, a sleek, radiant unit with light blade emitters and a shield that can refract beam attacks. It's built to look heroic. The Hound, by contrast, looks like it wandered in from a different genre. The fight starts with Cassian doing what Cassian does best, performance. He launches into a series of elegant arcs, light blades slicing the air, leaving luminous trails. The crowd screams. The camera gives us wide shots, letting you see the geometry of his movement. It's beautiful. Kyle doesn't rush. He stays low, grounded. The Hound's claws flex, scraping the platform. The bass pulse in the score rises, but it's tempered now by string motif, Kale's theme, mournful and insistent. Cassian strikes first, a clean slash across the Hound's shoulder armor. Sparks spray. Kyle grunts. He steps in, tries to grapple, but Cassian's shield flares and throws him off, the light reflecting into the camera lens like a flashbang. It's disorienting on purpose, making you feel how Cassian controls perception. And then Kyle adapts. He stops chasing Cassian's body and starts targeting his environment. He times his steps with the platform rotations. He uses the Hound's weight to shift a rotating segment faster, throwing off Cassian's footing. He slams a claw into the arena floor and rips up a panel, hurling it like a shield to block a beam. It's scrapyard fighting brought into a polished temple. Mid-match, the show gives us a gorgeous close-up of Kyle's face in the cockpit, sweat beading, eyes focused. He whispers, not just a king, like he's reminding himself of Kale's message. Then he says, be a door. And you see him change his goal. He's not trying to humiliate Cassian. He's trying to outmaneuver the system. There's a pivotal moment where Cassian gets Kyle pinned near the edge of a rising platform. Cassian's light blade hovers at the Hound's cockpit hatch, one more push away from a breach. The crowd is screaming. The commentators are losing their minds. The camera cuts between Cassian's clenched jaw and Kyle's narrowed eyes, both men breathing hard, both aware this isn't just sport. Cassian says over comm, voice tight, tell me it's you. Kyle doesn't answer. Cassian's eyes flash. Tell me you're alive, or I'll end this now. Kyle finally speaks, calm as a blade. You already know. And then the Hound's HUD flickers again with Kale's reticle. Kyle sees an opening Cassian doesn't. He drops the Hound's shoulder intentionally into Cassian's shield, not to break it, but to angle it. The shield refracts Cassian's own light blade beam into his left stabilizer. The Crown Flare's balance falters for half a second. Kyle takes it. He hooks Cassian's mech at the knee joint and pulls. Hard. The Crown Flare collapses, sliding across the platform, sparks showering. Kyle pins him, claws on shoulders, weight crushing. Cassian struggles, then stops, breathing heavy. The arena goes silent in that delicious suspense vacuum. Kyle could rip the cockpit open. He could make the crowd watch. He could become the monster Price wants. Instead, Kyle leans toward the comm and says, very softly, get up. Cassian's eyes widen. Kyle repeats, louder, for the crowd, for the cameras, for the Empire. Get up. Cassian swallows and forces his mech to stand, damaged but functional. And then he steps out of bounds voluntarily, conceding. The crowd erupts, confused cheers mixing with awe, because they just watched mercy in a place built for domination. The commentators scramble to narrativize it. One of them says, sportsmanship, and it sounds like he's trying to paste a safe label over something revolutionary. Kyle walks out of the ring as the winner, but his face isn't triumphant. It's grim, because he knows finals night is the trap. And then Cassian keeps his promise. In the mech bay, with no cameras, he hands Kyle a drive containing the Regalia Aster Core's access codes and its storage location. "I'm sorry," Cassian says. Kyle looks at him, and the show lets the silence do the work. Kyle finally says, "Sorry doesn't undo a year." Cassian nods. "I know." He hesitates, then adds, "But it might keep us alive tomorrow." That's the kind of dialogue this show does well. Not grand poetry, but practical emotion. Now, finals night. Episode 16. The whole series has been climbing toward it, like a tower built out of grudges and gas. The finals are held on Aurelia Prime, in the Grand Meridian Stadium, the same place Kai was crowned, the same tunnels he used to walk like a god. The production goes full imperial spectacle. Fireworks, drone formations making the Empire crest in the sky, a choir singing the circuit anthem with that militaristic harmony that always feels like a warning. Darius sits in the Chancellor's box, face stone, eyes haunted. Price stands nearby, smiling like a man about to unveil a magic trick. Kyle arrives under heavy cloak, still Kellen in official registries. But now he's carrying Mina's file, Serra's token, Cassian's codes, and Rhea's stubborn belief like armor. Rhea walks beside him with a tool case that might as well be a bomb. Juno is in their comms, voice tight, saying signal cloak is active. But once you step into the ring, they'll scan everything. Brig is in the Larkspur on standby for extraction, grumbling prayers to his circuit board shrine. They have a plan. Kyle will fight in finals to draw the cameras. Rhea and Serra will use the access token to infiltrate PRYCE's inner hangar beneath the stadium, where the Cerberus units are stored. Juno will hijack the broadcast feed to leak Mina's files to the public. Cassian will stall PRYCE's PR team and keep Black Keel attention split. Darius is the wild card, because they don't know if he'll protect the Empire narrative or his son. And if that setup sounds like a lot, it is. But the show manages it by keeping the emotional through line clean. Everyone is choosing where they stand, and choices have consequences. Before Kyle enters the arena, he takes a detour. Cassian's codes lead him to a sealed vault corridor deep in the stadium. The walls are polished black stone. The air is cold. He passes old banners of past Mecha kings, including his own portrait covered by ceremonial cloth. The symbolism isn't subtle, but it's effective. The Empire literally drapes over inconvenient history. Kyle reaches the vault door and enters, and there she is, Regalia Aster, his old mech, restored, pristine, imperial gold and deep blue, crest shining like it never touched dirt. The camera lingers on Kyle's face as he looks at it, and the actor does this tiny, devastating thing. His eyes soften like he's seeing a childhood home, then harden like he's remembering it burned. He steps closer, hand hovering over the armor plating, and for a second, he just breathes. Then he whispers, "I'm sorry I left you," which is ridiculous because it's a machine. Except in this show, it isn't ridiculous, because the mech is a record of who he was, and he did leave it in shame and exile. Then he looks past it and sees another frame in the shadows, a second Cerberus unit, unfinished, with the same brutal geometry as the Hound but sleeker, updated. On its chest, a painted symbol, a three-headed hound, Cerberus. Kyle's stomach drops. He realizes Price didn't just keep the Hound as a secret relic. He scaled it. He made a line. And finals night is his showcase. This is where the show drops the rehook that made me sit forward. Kyle can win the crown back tonight. But if he does it without exposing Cerberus, he becomes PRYCE's cover story. And if he exposes Cerberus, he risks becoming the monster they'll blame for the chaos. Kyle returns to the staging tunnel where Rhea waits. She takes one look at his face and says, "You saw it." He nods. She tightens the strap on her tool case. "Then we don't lose time," she says. The finals match is billed as Kyle's anonymous rise versus Cassian's official reign, but Price throws a twist into the ring. Cassian is not Kyle's final opponent. Cassian is pulled for security reasons, replaced by a new challenger introduced with a flourish. The Cerberus Prime unit, piloted by none other than Admiral Soren Price himself. Yes, Price gets in the mech, and the show makes it chilling rather than fanservicey. Price walks into the arena wearing a pilot harness like a military medal, face calm, eyes bright with that specific mania of people who believe they are history incarnate. The crowd is confused at first. An admiral fighting? Then the propaganda machine kicks in instantly. Commentators shout about leadership, duty, the Empire's strength embodied. Darius face tightens in the Chancellor's box. He leans forward like he wants to stop it, but doesn't know how without revealing his own complicity. PRYCE's Cerberus Prime is a masterpiece of manners, made black armor with subtle gold trim, and they lose their minds. The music swells into that old brass theme, but warped now with a hound pulse beneath it, like past and present colliding. PRYCE's eyes widen for the first time. He didn't anticipate Kyle reclaiming his own myth in real time. Kyle does something wild. He ejects. He ejects from the hound mid-match, launching in a capsule that arcs across the ring while Price swings at empty air. The capsule lands on Regalia Aster's docking platform, and Kyle slams into the cockpit of his old mech, like coming home to a house that's been waiting with lights on. The transition is shot with this gorgeous sensory emphasis. The different smell inside Regalia Aster, cleaner, familiar. The HOD glyphs Kyle can read like his own language. The way his shoulders drop half an inch because his body remembers this machine's rhythm. He links in, and for a heartbeat, you see a montage flash Kyle's old victories, the crown ceremony, the tribunal, Sable Husk Ash, Rhea's face, Kale's video. Then his eyes open, steady. "Okay," he whispers. Now the finals become a duel between two philosophies, Imperial Hero Mech versus Black Budget Monster Mech, except Kyle is piloting the Hero Mech and Price is piloting the monster. The inversion is delicious. Kyle uses Regalia Aster's precision to outmaneuver PRYCE's brutality, while the Hound, unpiloted, stands at the ring edge like a sleeping guardian, Kale's imprint humming inside. Kyle's first move in Regalia Aster isn't to attack Price. It's to broadcast. He opens a channel and says, "Juno, drop the files." The stadium screens glitch again, then display Mina's archive, Project Cerberus documents, Kale's status, PRYCE's authorization chains. And yes, Darius' signature appears on one of the early pages. The crowd roars, a wave of shock and betrayal. The commentators go silent. Then one starts babbling about unverified data, and you can hear his producer screaming in his ear. Darius watches his signature appear on the screen, and the camera holds him in a long, brutal shot. He doesn't sit down. He doesn't hide. He just stands there, exposed, like the Empire has finally shone its clean light on the dirt it buried. His lips part, and you can see him whisper, "Kill." Price, enraged, triggers the Cerberus activation sequence anyway. Deep under the stadium, the sleeping unit's optic clusters ignite. The hangar fills with that triple throat engine growl, echoing up through the concrete like a demon waking. Rhea and Sarah are still inside. Technicians panic. Black Keel soldiers rush. And then Rhea does the most Rhea thing possible. She climbs onto the central control platform, pulls open a maintenance panel, and starts ripping cables out with her bare hands even as sparks bite her skin. Sarah covers her with a stolen rifle, firing at approaching soldiers. Rhea screams through clenched teeth, "You don't get to use people like batteries." And the line is cheesy on paper, but in the moment it lands, because the actress sells it with pure feral rage. Juno, on comms, is trying to overload the core network. If I spike the resonance grid, it'll fry half the units, Juno says. Brig, listening, mutters. Huff? That's your plan? Juno snaps. Would you prefer all of them? Brig goes quiet. Even he knows the math. Back in the ring, Kyle and Price fight as the stadium descends into chaos. Sirens start blaring. The audience doesn't know if it's part of the show. Some cheer, some run. The Empire's security drones descend like angry insects. Price snarls, "Look at what you've done. You've turned your people into animals." Kyle blocks a strike, voice steady. "You did that years ago. I'm just making them see it." Price lunges again. And this time Kyle doesn't just dodge, he redirects, using Regalia Aster's shield to catch PRYCE's blade and lock it. He twists, forces PRYCE's Cerberus Prime off balance, and slams him into the ring barrier. Sparks explode. The crowd screams. And then the show gives you one of those delicious, intimate villain moments. In PRYCE's cockpit, sweat beads on his upper lip. His eyes are wide. Not with fear of death. Price doesn't fear that. With fear of losing authorship. He whispers, "No." Kyle's voice crackles through the comm, calm and brutal. "It's not your story anymore." Down in the hangar, the Cerberus units begin to break free of their cables. One of them turns its head toward Rhea with that three-optic stare. Sarah fires, bullets pinging harmlessly off armor. Rhea looks up, breathing hard, hands burned, and for the first time, she looks small in the face of Imperial machinery. The unit steps forward. Then the Hound, above, moves. Yes, the Hound moves without Kyle in it. Kale's imprint takes control long enough to act. The Hound leaps from the ring edge down through a maintenance shaft entrance. Something no Imperial mech would do because safety locks would prevent it. The show shoots it like a myth. The beast diving into the belly of the stadium to protect the people who woke it. In the hangar, the doors blow inward as the Hound lands, claws digging into concrete. It roars, not literally, but with engine and hydraulics that sound like a throat tearing. The Cerberus unit freezes for half a second, like it recognizes skin. Then it attacks. What follows is a subterranean mech brawl that feels like two wolves fighting in a cathedral. Sparks light the darkness like candle flames. The Hound moves with that familiar ferocity. But there's something different now, more controlled, less hunger, more purpose. It blocks a strike aimed at Rhea. It shoves Sarah out of the way of a falling cable. It takes hits that dent its armor and keeps moving because its pilot imprint doesn't care about pain anymore. Rhea stares up at it, tears mixing with grime. She whispers, "Kill," like she doesn't know if she's allowed to say the name. Sarah, bleeding from a cut on her forehead, mutters, "Tell me you're seeing this." Rhea laughs, a broken sound. "Yeah," she says. "I'm seeing it." Up in the ring, Kyle senses something through the comm static engine frequencies, the Hound pulse shifting. He realizes Kale is fighting without him. His throat tightens. He almost falters. Price takes advantage, slamming Kyle's shield aside and driving a blade toward Regalia Aster's cockpit seam. Kyle barely catches it, metal screeching. Price leans into the comm, voice dripping. "Even your brother prefers the beast," he whispers. "He left your pretty throne behind." Kyle's eyes go cold. "He didn't leave it," he says. "He sent me a message." He shoves Price back and then speaks, not to Price, but to Kale, like he can hear, "I'm here." And then the show does something I didn't expect and honestly loved. Kyle opens Regalia Aster's external broadcast and speaks to Darius directly, live, in front of the whole Empire. "Father," he says. Darius' head snaps up. The camera cuts to him, eyes wet now, because the facade is gone. Kyle continues, voice shaking just slightly. "You taught me that stability was everything. You taught me to carry the Empire like it was a sacred thing. And when they brought you evidence, you chose the evidence over me." The crowd hushes again. Like even in chaos, they can feel a private wound becoming public. Kyle's voice hardens. Did you choose Cerberus over Kill too? Darius' face contorts. He looks like he's been hit physically. Price, in the ring, laughs in triumph because he thinks he's just detonated Kyle's family on live broadcast. But then Darius does the thing the entire storyline has been asking for. He admits he was wrong. Not with a perfect speech, with an ugly, honest crack in his voice. He steps to the front of the Chancellor's box, grabs the broadcast mic intended for ceremonial announcements, and says, yes. The single syllable hits the stadium like a falling tower. Darius continues, voice rough, I signed the program. I believed the briefings. I believed the fear. I told myself it would prevent war. And it took my son. He swallows hard. And then it tried to take my other son. And I let it, because I was too proud to admit I had built a monster. He turns, eyes blazing, and points at Price down in the ring. This man used my signature to hide his crimes. I will not protect him. That is the moment you feel the show exhale. Not because Darius is redeemed, he isn't, not fully, but because the lie has finally been spoken aloud. And for Kyle, hearing his father say yes is like hearing the truth after years of gaslighting. Kyle's eyes close for half a second. When they open, he looks older. PRYC's face twists. You sentimental fool, he spits. You think confession makes you moral? Darius' voice rings out, trembling with rage. No, it makes me accountable. And then he does something that seals his choice. He orders the Imperial Guard, his own personal unit, to arrest Price. The guards hesitate, because Price has black keel embedded everywhere. The stadium becomes a powder keg of divided loyalties. Price realizes he's losing institutional control, so he goes for raw violence. He triggers Cerberus Prime's overload mode, intending to cause a catastrophic explosion in the ring and blame it on Kyle. His cockpit alarms blare. His Mecha's core glows red-hot. The audience screams as heat ripples distort the air. Kyle sees it on his HUD. Regalia Aster warns, core meltdown imminent. Here's where the final earns its emotional payoff. Kyle doesn't run. He doesn't prioritize his own survival. He prioritized the people in the stands. He knows a core explosion will rip through the stadium like a bomb. So he does the Dur thing. He slams Regalia Aster into PRYCE's Cerberus Prime and locks their frames together in a grapple, using his Mecha's shield field to contain the blast radius. He drags Price toward the ring's edge, where blast vents can redirect upward. The metal groans. Warning lights flash. Kyle's hands shake on the controls. Sweat runs down his temple. The sound mix becomes a roar of alarms, and that bass pulse thundering like a heart about to burst. Price laughs. Wild. You think you can carry me? He snarls. Kyle grits his teeth. I carried your lies long enough. In the Chancellor's box, Darius watches, horrified. He pounds on the glass, shouting Kyle's name, but the audio is drowned out by sirens. Cassian, backstage, runs toward emergency controls, trying to open evacuation gates. Rhea, deep below, hears the core warning through comm static and screams, Kyle, don't. And then the Hound arrives back at the ring. It climbs up through a service hatch, battered, smoking, armor dented. Kale's imprint has brought it back to the surface like a guardian returning to the battlefield. It stands at the ring edge, looking at Regalia Aster locked with Cerberus Prime. The Hound's HUD pulse floods the audio mix. Kyle looks over through Regalia's external cam and sees it. He whispers, Kale. The Hound steps forward, and for a moment you expect it to attack Price. Instead, it places its claws against Regalia Aster's back like hands on a brother's shoulders. It pushes with Kyle. To mechs, one legacy, one beast, shoving the melting core toward the blast vent. PRYCE's eyes widen in his cockpit. For the first time, he looks afraid, not of death, but of losing to something he can't manipulate, family loyalty, even in broken form. The music swells into a hybrid of Kyle's old theme and the Hound pulse, brass and bass colliding into something almost overwhelming. The visuals go white-hot as the core reaches critical. They shove Cerberus Prime into the vent zone. The explosion erupts upward like a sunburst, blasting through the stadium's open roof, fire and debris shooting into the night sky. The shockwave rattles the stands, but the shield field and vent design contain most of it. The crowd screams, then falls into stunned silence as the smoke clears. Regalia Aster staggers, armor scorched, systems failing. The Hound falls to one knee, its optic clusters flickering. Kyle's cockpit fills with smoke. He coughs, eyes watering. His hands tremble as he tries to stabilize. Alarms blare, system failure, neural link instability. And then, in the smoke, Kyle hears a voice, not through comm speakers, but through the neural link itself. Kale's imprint, faint, breaking up like an old radio signal. Kyle, door. Kyle's eyes squeeze shut, tears finally spilling. I tried, he whispers. Kale's imprint flickers one last time. Good. Then the Hound's optic lights go dark. I need to pause on that, because it's the kind of emotional beat that could have been corny, but the show earns it by keeping it understated. Kale doesn't deliver a long farewell monologue. He doesn't become a magical ghost. He's an imprint, an echo, doing one last act of agency before fading. It's tragic in a way that fits the sci-fi ethics the show has been building. The Empire stole even his death, and all he gets back is a brief moment of choice. 3 optic clusters on the head that shift like scanning eyes, clawed hands that can fold into blades. And the sound design gives it this triple-layer engine growl, like 3 throats humming at once. When it steps into the ring, the ground trembles, and the audience cheers because they don't understand what they're cheering for. Kyle stands opposite in the Hound, claws flexing, HUD pulsing. Two beasts, one haunted by a brother, one driven by a tyrant. The match begins, and Price fights like someone who has never had to fear consequences. He is aggressive, theatrical, cruel. He swings the Cerberus Prime's blade claws with wide arcs meant to look good on camera, but every strike is aimed at cockpit seams. He wants blood, not because it's necessary to win, but because it's useful to his narrative. If Kyle dies publicly, the traitor myth becomes permanent. If Kyle survives but looks monstrous, Price wins too. Either way, Price wins unless Kyle breaks the game. Kyle tries to keep distance, to fight strategically, but Price closes fast, using burst thrusters that kick up glittering dust from the ring surface. The camera cuts between wide, offilled stadium shots and tight cockpit shots where Kyle's breath becomes ragged. The music is a war march now, but under it, that low Hound pulse keeps insisting, beast, beast, beast. Halfway through the first round, the show crosscuts to Rhea and Sarah infiltrating PRYC's inner hangar. This sequence is shot like a thriller, dim corridors, red emergency lights, the distant hum of massive engines. They use Sarah's token to bypass a checkpoint, but Black Keel soldiers patrol, their boots echoing like metronomes. Rhea's hands are steady as she hacks a panel, but you can see sweat on her brow. Sarah whispers, "If we get caught, we are dead." Rhea replies, "If we don't, we are dead later." They reach the hangar doors and crack them open just enough to see inside. Rows of Cerberus units suspended like sleeping demons, cables plugged into their spines. On a central platform, technicians in Imperial uniforms monitor core resonance readings. And on a screen at the far end, a single line of text. Activation sequence. Live broadcast trigger. Price is literally using the finals match as the activation key. The moment the crowd's attention is highest, he'll wake the Cerberus line, declare an attack, and seize emergency command. Rhea's face goes white. Sarah mutters, "He's insane." Rhea says, "No, he's confident. That's wars." Juno, in comms, is trying to hijack the broadcast, but Imperial firewalls are thicker here. "I can't break in clean," Juno says, voice frantic. "I can brute force it, but it'll trip alarms." Kyle, mid-fight, hears it and grits out, "Trip them." Because at this point, subtlety is dead. Back in the ring, Price lands a heavy strike that cracks the Hound's shoulder plating. Warning lights flash. Kyle winces. Price laughs over calm, delighted. "Look at you," he purrs. "The people wanted a monster. You delivered." Kyle's voice is cold. "You made me." PRYCE's laugh deepens. "No, I freed you. The Empire's rules were chains. I gave you a beast. I gave you purpose." That line is important. Price truly believes he's liberating violence from morality. He believes that's progress. Kyle stumbles, catches himself, and the Hound's HUD flickers again. Kale's reticle. Kale's whisper. "Door." Kyle's eyes sharpen. He stops fighting PRYCE's strength and starts fighting PRYCE's story. He opens his cockpit external mic, something pilots never do mid-finals because it's messy, unfiltered, and he speaks not just to Price, but to the stadium. "My name is Kyle Vane," he says. The stadium goes silent like someone cut the world's power. The commentators freeze. One of them stammers, "No, that's impossible." The crowd murmurs, confusion rippling. Darius' face drains of color. Cassian, watching from backstage, closes his eyes like he's been waiting for this drop. PRYCE's voice slices in, furious. "Do not." Kyle keeps going. "I was framed. I was exiled. And you cheered because you were told to hate me." The Imperial broadcast tries to cut his audio. Juno slams the brute force switch. The screen glitches. For 2 seconds, the feed goes black. Then it comes back with Kyle's voice louder, raw, because Juno rerouted it through pirate relays. And that is one of the most satisfying hell yes moments of the drama. Juno, the scrapyard gremlin coder, hijacking the Empire's perfect broadcast with sheer spite and talent. Kyle continues, "You want a villain? Look at the man across from me." Price snarls, and Cerberus prime lunges. Kyle barely blocks, claws locking, metal screeching so loud the stadium speakers distort. Kyle grits his teeth and shouts, "Admiral Price built Project Cerberus. He turned pilots into cores. He turned my brother into a weapon." The crowd erupts into chaos, some shouting disbelief, some shouting anger, some chanting Kyle's name like they remember how it used to feel. In the Chancellor's box, Darius stands abruptly, knocking his chair back. The camera cuts to him in close-up, and you see it. Horror, recognition, regret. Price glances up at him mid-fight and smiles like a man twisting a knife. He says into the comm, for Kyle to hear, "Tell them about your father's signature." Kyle flinches. The blow lands emotionally. Price isn't just trying to win the fight. He's trying to fracture Kyle's support by poisoning the father-son wound live on air. Kyle's throat tightens. He almost goes quiet. You can see the temptation to protect his father, even now, even after everything. And then Ria's voice cuts in overcom, breathless, urgent. "Kyle, we're in the hangar. We found the units." He's activating them through the broadcast trigger. Kyle's eyes snap back to purpose. Door, not crown. Door. He makes a decision that is both strategic and symbolic. He calls for the Regalia Aster. Yes, in the middle of finals, he does the impossible. He triggers Cassian's codes, and the vault doors in the stadium's sublevel open. Regalia Aster powers up, lights igniting like dawn. The mech rises from storage and moves autonomously toward the ring on emergency rails. Because Kyle built it with that function years ago, a King's Return gimmick he used in opening ceremonies. The show turns his own vanity trick into a weapon against tyranny. The crowd sees Regalia Aster emerge from beneath the arena floor like a resurrected legend. In the immediate aftermath, Imperial guards swarm the ring. Medics rush. Darius fights through security to reach Kyle, ignoring protocol for the first time in the entire series. Cassian arrives too, face streaked with soot, eyes wide, helping pry open Regalia Aster's cockpit hatch. Rhea limps into the arena tunnel, hands wrapped in bloody bandages. And when she sees Kyle alive, she collapses against a wall, laughing and crying at once. Kyle is pulled from the cockpit, coughing, covered in ash. He looks at Darius, and the father-son moment finally happens in the ugliest possible context. Sirens, smoke, the stadium half evacuated, people screaming, cameras still rolling because of course they are. Darius grabs Kyle's shoulders like he's afraid Kyle will vanish. His voice breaks. "I was wrong," he says, and this time it's not political. It's not performative. It's a father speaking to a son. "I was wrong about you. I was wrong about everything I thought I could control." Kyle stares at him, eyes red. He doesn't melt into forgiveness. He doesn't give a clean reconciliation. He says, "Kale is gone because of your signature." Darius flinches like he deserves it. Kyle continues, voice trembling. "And I'm here because someone on a scrapyard planet taught me what it means to survive without your name." Rhea, hearing that from a few feet away, looks down, swallowing emotion like it's too vulnerable to show. Darius whispers, "Tell me what to do." And that line is huge, because it's Darius surrendering the authoritarian posture he's worn like armor. He's asking, not ordering. Kyle looks at the chaos around them, the people evacuating, the broken mechs, the screens still flickering with leaked files. He says, "Stop letting fear write laws." Then he looks at Cassian, then at Rhea, then back at Darius. "Arrest everyone involved. Open the archives. Pay the planets you've starved. And never build another Cerberus." Darius nods, tears in his eyes. "I will," he says. And the show, wisely, doesn't pretend that fixes everything. It just marks the beginning of accountability. Price is dragged out of the wreckage alive because the show denies him martyrdom. He's burned, furious, screaming that the Empire will fall without him. Guards restrain him. He tries to spit at Kyle, but his mouth is full of ash. Darius looks down at him and says, coldly, "You wanted to be history. You'll be trial records." That line is so satisfying because it strips Price of the myth he was trying to build. No heroic death. No glorious coup. Just paperwork and prison and the slow grind of consequences. The final episode's structure is interesting because it resists a neat victory lap. It becomes a fallout episode, and those can be boring in weaker shows. Here, it's where the themes land. We see Senate hearings broadcast openly for the first time in years. Mina Soren's name appears on a casualty list, confirmed dead in the archive raid, and Kyle watches it in silence. He doesn't make a speech about her. He just sits on the Larkspur's cargo ramp, staring at the stars, jaw tight, and you feel the weight of the cost. Rhea sits beside him, shoulder to shoulder, not touching, just present. She says, "She knew." Kyle nods. "Yeah," he whispers. "She knew." We see Sarah testify, limping to the witness stand, refusing to soften her words. "Cerberus was not a mistake," she says. "It was policy." The Senate chamber is all marble and blue holograms again, but now it looks less clean and more like a tomb. The show frames the senators from below, making them look like looming statues. Because even when the truth is out, power still towers. Cassian, in a move that completes his arc, publicly returns the Mecha King crest. He stands in front of press drones, face pale, and says, "I've benefited from a lie. I will not be its heir." People boo him. People cheer him. He accepts both like penance. And the actor playing Cassian sells the relief of finally dropping the smile. His shoulders sag. He looks like a man who can finally breathe. Kyle's title is offered back to him in a ceremonial restoration scene that's intentionally uncomfortable. Darius stands on the dais, holding the crown emblem, cameras flashing. The choir is ready. The Empire wants to patch the story by putting Kyle back where he belongs, like returning the king fixes the kingdom. Kyle looks at the emblem and doesn't take it immediately. The show lingers on his hand hovering, echoing all those earlier moments of hovering over forbidden things, the Hound cockpit, The archive file, the regalia armor. Choice, choice, choice. Kyle finally takes the emblem, then sets it down on the dais instead of placing it on himself. He turns to the crowd and says, "I'm not just the Much King." And when he says the title line, it doesn't feel like a catchphrase. It feels like a refusal to be reduced again. He continues, "If you want a king, you want a story you don't have to change. I'm not here for that. I'm here to open doors." He gestures toward the viewing screens showing images of Sable Husk, Halcyon Drift, border worlds, scrap planets, places the Empire has treated like footnotes. "We rebuild with them," he says. "Or we don't rebuild at all." Now, could this have turned into a corny manifesto? It skirts that edge. But the show saves it by grounding it in consequence. Kyle isn't magically made Chancellor. He doesn't overthrow the Empire overnight. Instead, Darius announces a decentralization initiative, funding reparations, independent oversight of mech tech, and, crucially, opening the circuit entry system to non-imperial pilots with equal resources. It's reform, not revolution, and the show acknowledges that reform is slow and messy and often compromised. But it also shows that small structural changes matter when they're backed by exposure. Rhea, in the final scenes, refuses an imperial job offer. A senator tries to recruit her as chief mechanist of the new circuit, and she laughs in his face. She says, "I don't work for crowns." Kyle watches her, smiling faintly, and you can see what he's learned, not to possess the people who saved him. Instead, Kyle offers her something different. He asks her to help build an independent mech clinic on Sable Husk funded by seized Cerberus assets. Rhea stares at him, suspicious. "Is this you buying redemption?" she asks. Kyle shakes his head. "It's me paying a debt," he says. Rhea considers, then nods once. "Okay," she says. "But I'm in charge of the welders." Juno, of course, gets the best epilogue gag. They're offered immunity in exchange for testimony, and Juno says, "I prefer officially tolerated manners." The judge stares. Juno grins. Brig, sitting behind them, mutters, "Kid, shut up before they remember they can jail you." Juno whispers back, "They can try." It's a small laugh in the middle of heavy fallout, and it feels earned. And then there's the Hound. The Hound is recovered from the stadium wreckage and transported to a neutral hangar on Sable Husk, because Kyle refuses to let the Empire museum it. There's a final, quiet scene where Kyle and Rhea stand in front of it at sunset, the scrapyard planet's sky bruised purple and orange. The Hound's optic clusters are dark. It's just metal now, just a husk. Kyle places his hand on the Hound's chest plating where the Cerberus symbol was scratched away years ago. He closes his eyes. He whispers, "Thank you." Rhea watches him, expression softening in a way we've rarely seen. She asks, "Do you think he's gone?" Kyle opens his eyes. "I think he's resting," he says. And the show doesn't do a cheap flicker of lights. It doesn't tease Kale's return. It respects the farewell. The silence is the point. Now, stepping back as a reviewer, here's why watch out. I'm not just the Much King worked for me, even with some rough edges. The plotting is dense, sometimes almost too dense, especially in the mid-late episodes where you're juggling infiltration, broadcast hacks, political hearings, and mech duels. There were moments where I felt the writers stacking plates for the final, and I was like, okay, please don't drop one. But the character through lines are so clear that the density becomes momentum instead of confusion. Kyle's arc is the spine. He starts as a man who believes his identity is his title and his machine. He gets stripped down to hunger and humiliation. He finds a beast mech that mirrors his rage. He learns that rage can be useful and also corrosive. He discovers his brother's imprint inside the machine, turning his revenge into grief. And by the final, he uses both sides of himself, the king's precision and the beast's refusal to obey, to become something else. A person who can wield power without worshipping it. And I want to give real credit to the performance choices here, Because this kind of arc lives or dies on whether you by the inner shifts. The actor playing Kyle doesn't just do brooding tough guy. He does microphilia. He does those tiny involuntary flinches when someone says traitor. He does the shame in the welding scenes. He does the ugly, breathy near sobs when he sees Darius' signature. Those are not glamorous beats, but they're what make the catharsis feel human. Rhea, too, could have been written as the generic tough mechanic who softens the hero. Instead, she stays herself. She doesn't become a crown accessory. She's the moral compass that still curses and bleeds and gets angry. Her love language is labor. The show never makes her apologize for that, which I respected. And the chemistry between Kyle and Rhea is built on mutual witnessing rather than flirt banter. When they finally kiss, yes, they do, late, quiet, in the Larkspur cargo bay after Mina's death is confirmed, it's not fireworks. It's exhaustion and relief. Kyle's hands shake. Rhea's eyes close like she's been holding her breath for 12 episodes. It's tender in a way that didn't cheapen the plot. Cassian's arc is the sneaky standout. It would have been easy to write him as disposable rival, making him complicit but redeemable without pretending his complicity didn't harm Kyle gave the story texture. When Cassian returns the crest publicly, it doesn't erase his year of smiling propaganda, but it does show what accountability can look like when you're not the main hero. That's rare, and it made the world feel bigger than Kyle's pain. Visually, the show is a feast. The way it distinguishes planets and spaces through color and texture is not just pretty, it's narrative. Sable Husk's ash palette makes every warm light feel precious. Aurelia Prime's clean whites become sinister over time. The glass basin arena is one of the most beautiful sets I've seen in a mech drama, and the decision to place Kyle and Sarah's fight on literal reflection was the kind of symbolism I normally roll my eyes at. But here it worked because the characters actually behave differently in that space. The show earns its metaphors by tying them to choices, not just aesthetics. Sound design deserves a whole rant, but I'll keep it pointed. The Hound Pulse is genius. It functions like a psychological trigger. By the end, whenever you hear that distorted bass, you're not thinking cool mech. You're thinking how close is Kyle to losing himself? And when the pulse fades in the final scrapyard scene, it feels like grief settling. If I had to critique something sharply, it's that the Senate fallout in the final episode gets a little neat around the edges. The show wants to believe exposure leads to reform, and while it does show pushback and divided loyalties, the machinery of political change moves faster than reality. But, and this is important, it compensates by making the emotional consequences not neat. Kyle doesn't forgive Darius fully. Darius doesn't get to die heroically. Price doesn't get to be a myth. Mina stays dead. Kale stays gone. Those are not tidy comforts. Those are scars. And the title line, "I'm not just the Mecha King," lands because the show doesn't use it as a brand. It uses it as an identity refusal. Kyle refuses to be reduced to a trophy, a villain, a savior, a crown. He chooses a harder role, a door, someone who creates passage instead of hierarchy. So where does that leave the Romans? Where does that leave the circuit? The show ends with the circuit continuing, but changed. The next season is teased with an open qualifier event on Sable Husk itself, the arena built out of reclaimed scrap, the crowd not polished nobles, but workers and scavengers, and kids with grease on their faces. Kyle stands beside Rhea in the pit. No crown, just a pilot harness. Cassian arrives not as king, but as competitor, stripped of sponsor emblems, looking almost nervous. Sarah sits in the stands with a cane, smirking like she can't believe she's still alive to see it. Juno is running the broadcast, of course, because nobody else can be trusted with the feed. Kyle steps toward the starting line and looks up at the sky where the old Imperial drones once formed crests. Now there are no drones, just clouds, just weather, just a world that doesn't care about your propaganda. He turns to Rhea and says, "Ready?" Rhea snorts. I was born ready, she says, then softens, just a little. Don't make me regret believing in you. Kyle's mouth twitches. I won't, he says. And as the starting siren begins to rise, the camera pans across the scrapyard arena, the crowds roar rough and real. And for the first time in the entire series, the sound mix gives you something like hope without pretending hope is clean, because you can still hear distant machinery groaning under the ground, reminding you that empires don't die in one night and monsters don't vanish just because you name them. And Kyle steps forward anyway, hands steady on the controls. Not because he thinks he can fix everything, but because he finally understands what he can do next is open the first gate and let other people run through it. And the siren peaks and cuts. And the siren peaks and cuts into that first brutal second of silence before metal moves, the kind of silence that makes your stomach float. Then the engines answer. Not the polished anthem hum of Aurelia Prime, but a rough chorus of patched thrusters and salvaged hydraulics, like the whole arena is singing in a language the Empire used to pretend wasn't civilized. Kyle lowers his visor. Ria's hand slaps the side of the cockpit in that mechanic's go get it blessing, and the camera pulls back far enough to show you the scale of it. A scrabbled ring under a bruised sky, a crowd that isn't paying to be entertained, but showing up to witness themselves, and a former king stepping into the same kind of noise that once swallowed him, only now he's not trying to rise above it. He's standing inside it. And when the mechs surge forward, the show doesn't give you a clean heroic freeze frame. It gives you motion, dust, imperfect balance, the messy continuation of a world that's still healing, and then it cuts to black on impact, like it's telling you, this isn't the end of the story. This is the new baseline. I've seen a lot of finales that try to wrap everything in ribbon, and what I appreciated about Watch Out, I'm Not Just a Mecha King, is that it refuses the ribbon while still giving you catharsis. Price gets exposed and arrested, yes, but not in a way that magically dissolves the Empire's appetite for control. Darius confesses, yes, but confession is treated like the beginning of a reckoning, not the end of guilt. Kyle gets his name back, but the show doesn't hand him comfort as a price for suffering. Even Kale's imprint, arguably the most sci-fi miracle element, doesn't become a loophole that resurrects him. It's a brief flare of stolen agency, and then it's gone. That's harsh. It's also respectful. The drama understands that grief doesn't get solved. It gets carried differently. One more thing that I think deserves praise, the show treats labor as heroic. Not in a performative, blue-collar aesthetic way, but in an actual narrative way. Ria's hands, Juno's sleepless coding, Briggs' battered ship, Sable Husk's salvage culture. These are not background texture. They are the infrastructure of Kyle's comeback. The series is basically saying, kings are manufactured by workers. And if workers stop cooperating with the myth collapses. That's political, sure. It's also emotionally satisfying because Kyle's growth is inseparable from learning that he was never self-made. So yes, overall, I loved Watch Out. I'm not just the Much King. I loved the way you love a story that makes your heart race and then makes you sit quietly afterward, staring at nothing because a brother's voice said one line and it lodged somewhere deep. It's not perfect. It occasionally over-explains, occasionally rushes the bureaucracy, occasionally luxuriates in spark slow-mo like it's flirting with a music video. But it's bold, it's emotionally literate, and it takes its own themes seriously without forgetting to deliver the primal satisfaction of giant metal monsters throwing each other through walls. If you made it this far with me on Flick Flare, drop a comment with the moment that hit you hardest. Was it Kyle reading Darius' signature, the hound moving on its own, Cassian finally taking off the smile, or that ugly, beautiful yes from Darius in the Chancellor's box? And if you want more long-form breakdowns like this, where we talk story, craft, and why a single sound motive can feel like a heartbeat, hit like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.